joined NZX in February 2020 as Head of Issuer Relationships. Sarah's team works with all of the listed issuers across equity, debt and funds, and also spends time working with companies that are considering listing on the exchange. Sarah has deep experience in capital markets, most recently as a Director of Capital Markets at Bank of New Zealand, and began her career as a lawyer with Freshfields, Bruckhaus, Deringer, LLP, New York, and Russell McVeagh.
Thanks so much for coming in this morning, Sarah. As you know, we're doing this leadership series and we thought it would be really interesting, even though we're still in the middle of the pandemic, to think about really the biggest challenges of last year for the NZX in particular as we went into lockdown and really how you led through that crisis over the last 15, 18 months or so.
Well, last year was a very unusual year for everyone, including me. I joined NZX 15 days before the hard level 4 lockdown. Wow. So I didn't have a lot of time to even meet everyone in the organisation. You know, I had a couple of trips to Wellington to meet a lot of the team that are based down there, and then of course I was spending some time with the team in Auckland. But it wasn't long to get to know a whole new group of people. And COVID hit, the market immediately responded to that. You know, there was a sort of a 30% downward movement in the market, and you know, everyone's aware that since then the market's rebounded very strongly, but at the time people weren't necessarily thinking that that was the case. You know, it was entirely plausible at that moment that the market would fall another 30%. Yeah. So, you know, we were immediately dealing with quite extreme conditions, and of course, you know, quite a number of issuers that were having to take a really hard look at how do I manage my balance sheet in this period of uncertainty, and in a period of uncertainty that it's very hard to predict how long it will be. So we had a lot of companies that were under quite a lot of pressure to raise capital, and they did that very well. They came to the market very quickly. And what was interesting about that time was that when you compare it to, say, something like the GFC, the velocity with companies coming to the market was about 5 times quicker than they did following the GFC. So there was this huge stampede towards getting capital in the door to, you know, make sure that businesses could continue to operate sufficiently and well through the pandemic and the lockdown conditions, which is very important for keeping, you know, people employed and keeping businesses running. And I think that, you know, all of the issuers did that very well. But of course, you know, there were some leadership actions we really needed to take there. You know, our regulatory team relaxed the rules to allow people to raise more capital under slightly different frameworks. We had to change the rules around disclosure for a time because it was very difficult for people to, you know, disclose certain things with such uncertain conditions. So, you know, it was really a supercharged set of factors to be walking into. And that was my welcome to NZX.
And on that, I guess looking at it internally as well, how did you, from a leadership perspective, take charge? Because obviously you've gone in on the executive team, you'd been there for 15 days and suddenly you're working from home.
Yeah, it was really stepping into a whole set of unknown factors in terms of leading, and what I decided from the outset was I'm going to make an assumption that people are going to do a really good job and that I can trust them, and I'm just going to let people operate in their areas and trust their areas of expertise, and then if we need to make a correction or if things aren't quite going so well, we'll do that, but the base case assumption needs to be people are going to do a superb job. And actually people really stepped up to the challenge in very difficult circumstances and did that. So I think placing trust was the key thing. Yeah. And then the second thing I would say about that time was, in terms of leading a team that you didn't really know, it became quite apparent that COVID and the lockdown, whatever people were experiencing in terms of personal challenges, they experienced in a really heightened way because of course life carries on and people were going through things, you know, loss of a loved one or a family member, separation from family members because of the borders being closed, you know, relationship breakdowns, stress at home with trying to balance work and juggle parenting responsibilities, in some cases, you know, friends and family losing their jobs or having a lot of business stress. And so people were dealing with a lot of just a lot of really stressful things in a very heightened way. And I think just really getting to know people quite quickly in quite a personal way was important to be able to effectively lead a team.
Yeah, it brings a lot to a head quite quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really did.
What do you think, looking back, and clearly we're not out of the woods yet with this, but what the biggest learnings have been for you personally, but also the NZX?
I think one of the biggest learnings that stood out to me was that you can get really comfortable with being really uncomfortable all of the time. Which in a way is quite exciting because, you know, there was and still is such a big set of uncertain factors. No one can predict what's going to happen. And actually in markets, you know, no one can ever predict the market.
True. Yeah.
But just the extent of that was so much more amplified. And in a way, I think it was really freeing to see, okay, well, we're just in this great period of the unknown, so let's try some new things. And I think a big learning from that is sometimes it's good to actually give yourself the freedom to disregard some of the things that you've done before and try things a different way.
Interesting. Yeah. And look, I guess leading on from that a little bit, are there opportunities? I mean, we were just talking before about the market and how busy it is. I mean, what do you think is going to happen going forwards?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of opportunities for NZX arising out of the pandemic. I mean, certainly one of the obvious ones is just access to capital. You know, I think the pandemic and this period of uncertainty has made companies really focus on what does my access to capital look like? What is the appropriate structuring of my balance sheet? So of course that is front of mind for a lot of people, and I think people saw how quickly and effectively people raised capital in those first few months of the pandemic, and it was able to be right-sized to their balance sheet. It didn't have to be, you know, $1 billion jumbo deal. It could be a small kind of, you know, we had plenty of sub 20 million deals.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think another massive opportunity is in the area of technology. So of course there's been a lot made of, you know, the pivot to tech and using tech more effectively, and certainly all of the tech companies that we've been dealing with have had a lot of positive effects from COVID as people use their products more. But I think, you know, really drilling down into how can we take that even further and use technology to our advantage. Certainly one of the areas we are seeing that is in terms of investor engagement. So we are not doing really any in-person investor engagement anymore. Everything is pivoted to digital. And we're getting hundreds and hundreds more of the retail investors engaging with our companies in that channel.
So in many respects it could have been a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's just accelerated change that needed to come and was going to come, but it's happening a lot more quickly. And then the third area where I think there's a huge opportunity, and it's already starting, is really in the ESG space. You know, we're certainly seeing a huge amount of focus on ESG. We've recently launched our S&P NZX 50 carbon indices, which measure, you know, the cost of, essentially the cost of carbon for the economy and weight companies according to their carbon emissions. And so I think there's a real opportunity, given that we've all had this pause period and been at home, not travelling so much, not using as many resources, to really assess, you know, both on a micro level in terms of our own personal households, but also on a macro level in terms of businesses. What are we doing? Are we doing it the right way? Can we be more efficient? And, you know, what resources are we consuming to do business?
Okay, so look, from what you've said, obviously there's been a lot of challenges for everybody through the pandemic, but the market has responded well, and obviously the NZX has kind of adjusted to the situation. Are you feeling good about the future? I mean, do you think that coming out of COVID there is a good story for the NZX in New Zealand?
Yes, I do think as we emerge from the pandemic there is a good story for NZX. We're seeing quite a few factors that are driving that. So we're seeing across the board the biggest re-engagement and interest in equities that we have seen in 30 years. That's obviously been driven by a number of factors, including low rates, hard asset prices being very high, and also, the impact of platforms like Sharesies and Hatch that are really driving retail engagement. And I think one of the huge positives from that is there's really, an interest in financial literacy and people educating themselves about the market. So we're very positive about that aspect, and we're also very positive and proud of how the companies that are listed on the exchange have handled the pandemic conditions, because they've been very difficult, but a lot of them have, where they needed to, raise capital, and they've done that very effectively, and it's really stood them in good stead for trading through some very difficult conditions.
Thank you so much for coming in. Really good to hear how it's going, and I'm glad that your first year on the job was full of challenge, but obviously you have succeeded and are doing a great job, so really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Nikki.